I've always loved winter. The crisp air, the way fresh snow blankets everything, muting the world into a serene silence. So when I inherited my grandparents' old cabin deep in the woods, I thought it would be the perfect escape from my hectic city life. A week alone, surrounded by nature, sounded idyllic. The first few days were exactly what I'd hoped for. I spent my time reading by the fireplace, taking long walks in the snow, and sipping hot cocoa while watching the snow fall through the large living room window. There was no cell service out here, but that was part of the charm. I wanted to disconnect. On the fourth night, a heavy blizzard rolled in. The wind howled like a wounded animal, and snow whipped against the windows like tiny claws. I stoked the fire and wrapped myself in a thick blanket. That's when I first heard it. A faint knock at the door. I froze, listening intently. Who could possibly be out here in this weather? I approached the door cautiously, hesitated, then opened it a crack. No one was there, just swirling snow and darkness. I closed the door, telling myself it was just the wind playing tricks. An hour later, the knocking returned, louder this time. 3 deliberate raps. My heart pounded. "Hello?" I called out, pressing my ear against the door. Silence. Gathering all my courage, I yanked the door open. Again, nothing. I decided to check the perimeter, grabbing a flashlight and stepping outside. The cold was biting, and the beam of light illuminated only endless falling snow. Then I saw them, footprints leading from the woods straight to my door, but no tracks leading away. My breath caught in my throat. I hurried back inside, bolting the door behind me. Was someone out there? Were they still here? I tried to rationalize it, but fear was creeping in. Suddenly, the power went out, plunging the cabin into darkness, save for the flickering fireplace. I fumbled for candles, my hands shaking. As I lit one, a shadow moved across the wall. I spun around, but no one was there. The shadow stretched again, elongating unnaturally. It seemed to crawl along the walls, encircling me. "Who's there?" I shouted, my voice echoing. A whisper slipped through the silence, so faint I wasn't sure I'd heard it. My name, carried on the wind. I backed away until I felt the cold stone of the fireplace behind me. Then, from the corner of my eye, I saw a figure standing just outside the window. It was a silhouette, tall and gaunt, with eyes that glowed faintly in the dark. It stared at me, unblinking. I mustered every ounce of courage and dashed to the window, throwing the curtains shut. The knocking resumed, now more insistent, coming from all sides of the cabin. Doors, windows, even the roof, a cacophony of taps and thuds. I clapped my hands over my ears, sliding to the floor. "Leave me alone," I screamed, and then as suddenly as it started, the noise stopped. I listened, my ragged breaths the only sound. Minutes passed, maybe hours. I didn't move. Morning light filtered through the gaps in the curtains. Cautiously, I peeked outside. The storm had passed, leaving a pristine layer of snow. I opened the door and gasped. The entire cabin was surrounded by hundreds of footprints, all leading to my door, but none leading away. I didn't stay to ponder it. I grabbed my belongings and trudged to my car. As I drove away, I glanced in the rearview mirror. Standing at the edge of the trees was the figure, watching me leave. Its eyes, still glowing, were the last thing I saw before the cabin disappeared from view. I haven't returned since, but sometimes on cold winter nights, I hear faint knocking, and I wonder if it's still out there, waiting. I had always loved the solitude of winter. The silent blanket of snow that covered everything was my escape from the chaos of city life. This year, I decided to spend a week alone in my family's old cabin in the mountains, a place untouched since my grandfather passed away. The drive up was uneventful, but as I arrived, the sky darkened and snow began to fall heavily. By the time I settled in, a full-blown blizzard was raging outside. I didn't mind. I had enough supplies, and the isolation was what I had come for. On the second night, as the wind howled outside, I sat by the fireplace reading an old journal I'd found tucked away on a dusty shelf. It belonged to my grandfather. The entries were mundane at first, but then I stumbled upon pages filled with frantic handwriting. "They are watching," one entry read. "The shadows on the snow, they mimic, they deceive." A chill ran down my spine. I closed the journal, blaming my unease on the wind's eerie whistles. I decided to get some sleep. In the early hours, I awoke to a faint knocking sound. At first, I dismissed it as a branch against the window, but then I heard it again, more deliberate this time. I got up and went to the front door, hesitating before opening it. There was nothing but swirling snow and darkness. As I was about to close the door, I noticed footprints leading away from the cabin into the woods. They were fresh, and they weren't mine. "Hello?" I called out into the void. No response came, just the relentless wind. Uneasy, I shut the door firmly and locked it. The next morning, the storm had calmed and sunlight reflected off the pristine snow. I decided to follow the footprints, thinking perhaps someone might have been lost in the blizzard and needed help. As I tracked them into the woods, I noticed something unsettling. The footprints didn't have a clear pattern. They weaved erratically, sometimes disappearing altogether, only to reappear further ahead. And then they stopped abruptly in a small clearing. In the center stood a snowman, crudely made, with sticks for arms and pebbles for eyes. Something about it was off. Its head was tilted too far to the side, and the grin carved into its face seemed malicious. A shiver ran through me, and I felt an overwhelming urge to return to the cabin. As I turned, I saw another set of footprints, my own, leading back, but alongside them was a new set, as if someone had been walking beside me. Heart pounding, I hurried back, trying not to look over my shoulder. Back at the cabin, I locked every door and window. The sun was setting, and long shadows stretched across the snow. That night, the knocking returned, louder and more insistent. It came from all sides, as if the house was surrounded. I could hear whispers, indistinct but nearby. I clutched my grandfather's journal, flipping to the last entries. "They come in winter's deepest night. They knock to be let in. Do not answer. Do not look at them." The realization hit me like a cold dagger. The knocking grew into banging and the whispers turned to wails. Shadows flickered outside the windows, humanoid but distorted. I retreated to the basement, the only place without windows. In the darkness, I huddled, listening to the cacophony above. Hours passed, or perhaps minutes. Time lost meaning. Then silence. I waited, afraid to move. The first light of dawn filtered through the cracks. Cautiously, I emerged. The cabin was untouched, serene. I gathered my things, determined to leave. As I stepped outside, the snow was undisturbed. No footprints, no signs of any visitors. Was it all in my mind? As I drove away, I glanced back one last time. On the porch stood a snowman, its head tilted with a sinister grin. I always loved winter. The crisp air, the blanket of snow transforming the world into a silent wonderland. So when I inherited my grandfather's cabin deep in the woods, I thought spending some time there would be the perfect getaway. The cabin was miles away from the nearest town, isolated but inviting in its solitude. The drive up was uneventful, but as I turned onto the narrow, snow-covered path leading to the cabin, a sense of unease settled over me. The trees loomed tall, their branches heavy with snow, arching over the path like a tunnel. The sky was a fading gray, and the sun was just a dull glow behind thick clouds. When I arrived, dusk was settling in. The cabin stood untouched by time, just as I remembered from childhood visits, rustic and worn, but cozy. I unloaded my things, started a fire, and settled into the old armchair with a mug of hot cocoa. The quiet was comforting at first, just the crackling of the fire and the distant howl of the wind. As night fell, the wind picked up, whistling through the cracks in the windows. I heard a faint sound, like footsteps crunching in the snow outside. I brushed it off as a deer, or maybe a coyote. But then there was a knock at the door. It was soft, almost imperceptible. I hesitated, heart pounding. Who would be out here at this hour? I opened the door to find nothing but swirling snow and darkness. No footprints, no signs of anyone having been there. I shivered and shut the door tightly, telling myself it was just the wind. Back inside, I tried to read, but my eyes kept darting to the windows. Shadows seemed to shift just beyond the tree line. Then, another knock. Louder this time. I jumped up and opened the door quickly. Again, no one there. But this time, there was something on the doorstep. A small, intricate carved figurine made of ice, shaped like a person with arms outstretched. I picked it up carefully. It was cold and smooth, and as I held it, a chill ran through me that had nothing to do with the temperature. I brought it inside, set it on the table, and tried to shake off the unease. The wind howled louder, and the cabin creaked as if settling. Then I heard whispering, a faint, unintelligible murmur coming from outside. I pressed my ear to the wall, straining to make out the words. It was my name, carried on the wind. My blood ran cold. This wasn't my imagination. I grabbed my flashlight and shone it through the windows, sweeping the tree line. For a moment I saw a figure between the trees, a tall, slender silhouette. I blinked and it was gone. Panic began to set in. Deciding I'd had enough, I started packing my things. But when I tried the door, it wouldn't budge. The locks were undone, but it was as if something was pressing against it from the outside. The windows wouldn't open either, frozen shut. The whispering grew louder now inside the cabin. I spun around and my eyes fell on the ice figurine. It had melted halfway, and where it stood, water pooled on the table, reflecting a distorted image of my face. The whispers intensified, surrounding me. I shouted, "Who's there?" My voice echoed back, swallowed by the whispers. The shadows in the corners of the room seemed to stretch and creep toward me. The temperature dropped rapidly. My breath came out in frosty clouds. Desperate, I stoked the fire, hoping the warmth would chase away whatever was happening. Flames roared, casting flickering light across the room. For a moment, the whispers faded, and I felt a glimmer of hope. Then, the fire abruptly extinguished, plunging the cabin into darkness. I fumbled for my flashlight, but it flickered weakly before dying. The only light came from the pale glow of the snow outside. A figure emerged from the shadows, a woman, her form translucent like ice, eyes hollow, but fixated on me. Her voice was the whisper, clear now. "You've come back to me." I stumbled backward. "Who are you? What do you want?" She moved closer without seeming to move at all. "So long I've waited, trapped between worlds. Now, you will take my place." I felt an icy grip around my wrists, immobilizing me. Cold seeped into my bones. Memories not my own flooded my mind. A woman lost in a winter storm, seeking shelter in this very cabin, succumbing to the cold and despair. "No!" I struggled, pulling free from the unseen hold. I grabbed the melted figurine and hurled it at her. It passed through her form, shattering against the wall. Her expression twisted into one of rage. The cabin shook, and the windows cracked under the pressure of the howling wind. Summoning every ounce of strength, I dashed toward the door, throwing my weight against it. This time it flew open, and I stumbled out into the snow. I didn't look back. I ran to my car, hands trembling as I fumbled with the keys. By some miracle, the engine started. I sped down the narrow path, the branches scraping against the sides like clawed hands trying to pull me back. As I reached the main road, the whispers faded, and a heavy silence settled. I didn't stop driving until I was back in the city, the bright lights and noise a stark contrast to the oppressive quiet of the woods. It's been months since that night, but I can't escape it. In the silence between the sounds of the city, I still hear her whisper. Every time winter comes around, I feel her presence, growing stronger as the temperatures drop. I fear that one day I won't be able to escape, that I'll be drawn back to that cabin where she's waiting to claim what she believes is hers.